Targeting journalists, ABC's Brian Ross says the Bush administration is tracking the phone calls made by top reporters. Does he have the proof? Welcome to Reliable Sources, where today we turn our critical lens on new reports that the government is tracking reporters' calls. I'm Howard Kurtz. Ahead, our wide-ranging interview with Mike Wallace about his long and controversial career at 60 Minutes, and he is as opinionated as ever. But first, the controversy over the Bush administration tracking millions of phone calls took an ominous turn this week when ABC's Brian Ross reported that authorities are specifically cataloging the calls made by correspondents for that network and other news organizations. We spoke earlier with ABC's chief investigative correspondent. Brian Ross, welcome.
Thank you, Howard.
How did you find out that the administration is tracking your phone calls and those of other journalists?
Well, a confidential source and a leak, and a very good tip that was surprising to us. Someone told, a senior federal official told my colleague, Rich Esposito, that we know who you are calling. You should get some new cell phones, and quick. And that's what we know, Howard. We don't know how it is they know who we're calling. We've been trying to figure that out. But this source is so good that we take it very seriously.
Just on a personal level, what was your reaction to learn that law enforcement officials, according to this source, are analyzing the numbers that you dial, presumably in an effort to track down your other confidential sources?
Well, you know, I guess in an abstract way, I always thought that was likely or possible. But once I actually heard this specific information, and this person knew a couple of specific calls, it was truly alarming and made you think, well, my gosh, what are we going to do about this? I mean, it means a lot more in-person visits. I'm working on a big story now with people who are confidential sources inside the Federal Air Marshal Service. They were all alarmed that they might be exposed as talking with me in violation of rules, so it's of great concern.
Well, what other news organizations are having their phone calls tracked according to your informant?
We were told reporters at the New York Times and the Washington Post, and it seemed consistent with the information we know that the CIA has made several criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, the FBI, based on stories that the Post and the Times have run about CIA secret prisons, and a Jim Risen story at the New York Times about NSA wiretapping. In both cases, those agencies have confirmed that criminal investigations have begun, and when we checked with the FBI, they put out a statement that essentially said, we take logical investigative steps, starting with the phone records of the government agencies, and then you sort of read through and parse out what they say. It seems that if they go after reporters, they say they do it in a legal fashion.
Not exactly a hard denial. Were you given any names of journalists who might be on the receiving end of this?
Other than Esposito and Ross, no, but I'm assuming your colleague Dana Priest and Risen and others at the Times who have done a lot of important work that involved information that the CIA, I assume, presumes to be classified, and they see that as a violation of the law, and that starts the process by which they essentially can use provisions of the Patriot Act if they chose, or just a grand jury to pursue it. And it makes me feel, in a way, and this is, I think, the disturbing part, as if we are drug dealers or terrorists trying to traffic in information, and should we be using bags full of quarters like old mafia capos to avoid having our phone calls traced. And I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. I don't think any other reporter is either. We're trying to cover these stories, which are difficult but which are very important.
In those old movies, reporters would go to phone booths to make the calls, but there aren't that many phone booths anymore.
You can't find them anymore, right?
But now let me take the other side. If sources are leaking classified information, which is illegal on their part, why shouldn't the government be able to investigate and track down which reporters they're talking to?
Well, I think they should be able to investigate if they feel there's a crime, but I think going after reporters' phone calls and phone records is a way of chilling and preventing us from doing our job. And if you are chilling reporters, you're chilling the First Amendment. And I think that the public's right to know in this case supersedes these issues. If on their own they can figure it out, I think that's fair game in a way. Going after our phone calls, tracking them, we've received no notification formally from the phone companies or from the government that our records have been pulled. If in fact they have done that and we don't know about it, that's very upsetting.
And the federal government doesn't need a warrant in order to do this?
Well, I checked on that. There are two ways. They have something called the National Security Letter, which is a provision of the Patriot Act, in which essentially it's a FBI desk subpoena. An FBI agent can write it up and send it off, and the phone companies have to turn over the records and they're prohibited from diverging the facts to the customers. The FBI says they don't, as a practice, do that involving reporters. The other way is to use a sitting grand jury and issue a subpoena or go to a judge and get a warrant. But there, we're told that the FBI sometimes will ask for a stay of notification so you don't find out until afterwards. They do that in the case of a drug dealer. They don't want him to know they're investigating him. But in our case, there should be reason for us to be able to challenge it, and that, in fact, actually is underway now in New York, Howie. As you know, the New York Times got word that prosecutor Patrick Fitzgerald was after the phone records of several of its reporters.
Right.
They have fought it in court.
Let me just jump in here because we're short on time. That USA Today story, which said that the big telecommunications companies were cooperating with this National Security Agency monitoring of calls. At first, Verizon issued a denial. Now, Bell South has demanded a retraction. Is that story falling apart?
I don't think it's falling apart. I think there may be an issue with the word of whether there was a contract between the phone companies and the government, and that seems to be what they're hanging their hat on. But the bare bones of it were certainly confirmed to us and to others. The outline of the program was confirmed to us by senior officials. I think the story stands up. There may be some details that aren't quite right, and they're hanging their hats on that.
USA Today is standing by that story as well. Now, you wrote on your blog on ABC's website about the fact that your calls and the calls of other journalists apparently are being not eavesdropped upon, but certainly tracked and monitored. Why did you not report this on the air?
We have created this new ABC News blotter, we call it. We don't call it a blog, but where we have put out a number of stories that we break as we come across. And this has become an important way for us to communicate stories as they're developing. We sort of post them. It's like an old-fashioned police blotter. As things happen, we note them and put them there. And we're still working on a number of stories for World News Tonight on that issue. But that takes sometimes a more sophisticated and pulling those stories together, sometimes like a bigger reporting effort than the blotter, which is an accurate way, but sometimes it's as it happens, we're putting it out and watching it develop.
All right, well, I guess I'll have to add that blotter to my daily media diet. Brian Ross, thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Howard. I hope you do.